I died on my 20th birthday, and my husband personally fed me a cup of poison wine. For the throne and imperial power, he used me as a pawn and deceived everyone. In my final moments, I asked him if he would regret it. He scoffed and laughed. It's just a game. Why take it so seriously? When I opened my eyes again, there was a royal banquet for choosing a husband, and I pointed to the seventh prince in the corner, who was of low status. Sitting in a high seat, he crushed the wine cup in his hand, and blood splattered everywhere. The palace gates were shut tight. Only a small window on the right side of the hall was left open. Today was my birthday, yet there was no sign of celebration in Ning Palace, and even the palace maids and eunuchs had been dismissed. The young emperor held the poisoned wine with determination, his voice cold, eyes glistening, wearing the dragon robe and crown, which made his face, like jade, even more handsome and otherworldly. Ah Wu, drink it. You've held the position of empress for 3 years. It's time to give it up. I knelt tall before the table, where a golden dragon-patterned incense burner released a fragrant smoke, the scent he loved. Ah Mu, I don't want to die. I had married Chu Mu when we were young. At 15, I was given to him in marriage by the late emperor. We stood together to build his household, fought for the throne, shielded him from poison arrows, and shared hardships and deprivation. He was severely injured in an ambush, and I, pregnant, led the pursuers away, losing my appearance and the child. At that time, he cried while holding me and swore he would never betray me. After ascending the throne, he gave me his exclusive favor despite pressure from the court and noble families. I always believed in his words. Now, looking at his cold eyes, my heart ached with sorrow. I don't care about the empress position, but our Jir is still so young. I cried, begging him. His expression remained unchanged, his beautiful peach blossom eyes flashing with cruelty. His long, jade-like fingers gripped my chin tightly. I couldn't resist, and the cold wine eventually went down my throat. The wine was called Gowen, also known as the heartbreak grass. The pain of my intestines being pierced spread through my limbs, and I curled up at his feet, tears streaming down my face. In the past, he couldn't bear to see me in pain. I still remember when the crown prince abducted me and tortured me. When I was rescued, there wasn't a single intact piece of skin left. The pain kept me awake, and despite the crown prince's pursuit and the strategist's objections, he ran for half a day just to buy me an osmanthus cake. He said that eating something sweet would ease the pain. The young man who once held the osmanthus cake now overlapped with the emperor before me. I trembled, reaching out to him, but he dodged away. What will you do with Jir? He squatted down, his expression indifferent, watching me struggle in pain. After a long moment, he spoke. Wan Shu is afraid of pain and can't bear the hardships of childbirth. She'll treat Jir as her own. So it was Lin Wan Shu. The empty bed when I woke up from my dream, the figure I couldn't find in times of danger, the silent departure when defending Yin City. He had been with Lin Wan Shu all along. 5 years of deep affection, the pain of childbirth hanging by a thread, all for the benefit of another. I couldn't hold back the blood in my throat and spat it out. Some drops splattered onto his clothing, and he frowned in disgust, rising to order. The empress suddenly succumbed to a terrible illness and passed away. Follow the palace regulations and bury her. The bright yellow of his robes faded, and my brief life was consumed by imperial schemes, soft and naive. My soul floated, surrounded by vibrant red, bright and dazzling, much like the blood I had coughed up when I died. It was early spring in March, with snow still on the ground, and the pear blossoms in the courtyard had bloomed early. The magnificent imperial palace erupted in fireworks, like a sea of fire, incredibly lively. Today, Chu Mu was marrying Lin Wan Shu, the daughter of the Xiang family, who was also his beloved. And his first wife floated in the air, watching them as they played music together, standing on the high platform receiving the worship of the people. My mother once told me that after death, one enters reincarnation, forgetting all past lives. But I didn't forget. My soul seemed to be tethered to Chu Mu, stuck by some force, unable to leave his side. I followed him to court, to sign petitions, to eat and sleep. I watched as he married his beloved, went out in private with the Empress, shopped for lanterns, and spent affectionate moments on the bed that once belonged to us. Everything he had promised me, he was now fulfilling with someone else, and the wife who had shared life and death with him was nothing more than a discarded piece in his game. When he knelt for 3 days to ask for a marriage decree, I had already entered his game with my life. It was like a dream, where the cause and effect blurred, but the pain in my heart remained sharp and real. When I opened my eyes again, I saw the familiar carved bed. Tao Ji. I hesitated and called through the sheer curtain. The curtain was lifted, revealing a concerned face. "Princess, is there anything you need?" It was my maid, Tao Ji, from Chonghua Palace. I had been reborn, but the time wasn't perfect. At this time, my father and brothers had already died on the battlefield, and I had been granted the title of princess by an imperial decree, residing in Chonghua Palace. The past was already set and could not be changed. But the marriage decree had not yet been issued, and I still had a chance to protect myself. During the Mid-Autumn Festival banquet, the corridor was filled with palace lanterns, and the imperial garden was adorned with exquisite trees and plants, with cups and dishes exchanged in great cheer. As the royal princess of Zhaoning, I naturally had to attend. Because it was a reunion banquet, all the royal princes and princesses were present, including Chu Mu. In the last life, at this very banquet, Prince Jin, Chu Mu, had asked for my hand in marriage. The emperor refused him, fearing his power would threaten the crown prince's position. Later, he knelt in the imperial study for 3 days before receiving the marriage decree, at the cost of giving up the command of the city's defense forces. In this life, the emperor's gaze fell on me again, and he smiled. "Zhao Ning is now of marriageable age. It's time to choose a husband." As soon as the words left his mouth, the room went silent. Everyone knew that behind Princess Zhao Ning stood the Nanfeng army of the Lu family. Although my father and brothers were gone, I had grown up on the frontier, and my uncles from the Lu family were still my supporters. I stood up first and knelt. "Your Majesty, Zhao Ning already has someone she loves. Please grant me a marriage." The emperor's face darkened, but he remained composed. "Oh, and who is this man?" "Zhao Ning has feelings for the 7th prince." The words were like a thunderclap, and everyone exchanged glances in surprise. The once handsome face of Prince Jin was suddenly overshadowed, and his hand crushed the wine cup hidden under the table. The emperor frowned, not immediately recalling who the 7th prince was. It wasn't until Eunuch Kong whispered in his ear that he suddenly realized. The 7th prince's status may be too low for Zhao Ning. The emperor's words were filled with dissatisfaction. He actually intended for me to marry the crown prince. I lowered my head. The 7th prince is the heir, a ruler, and Zhao Ning is a subject. Marrying the 7th prince is already a high honor. The emperor valued the orphan of the Lu family, and since I had brought it up, there was no reason to refuse. After a brief hesitation, he nodded. "In that case, I approve." The 7th prince's status was low, and even with the support of the Nanfeng army, he had no power to rival the crown prince unless he rebelled. I bowed in gratitude, and my eyes glanced toward the seat of Prince Jin, which was now empty, leaving only a small pool of blood on the floor. After the banquet, I took Tao Ji back to the Chonghua Palace. Tao Ji looked worried. "Is the princess really going to marry the 7th prince?" I looked at the full moon in the sky, its silver light casting over the imperial city, breathtakingly beautiful. People living here, aren't they all just pawns in the hands of the rulers? Naturally, I must marry him. The emperor had many heirs, and the 7th prince, Chu Yu, was born from a dancer who had climbed into the emperor's bed. His lowly status made the emperor despise him. His mother failed to fight for favor and was exiled to the cold palace with him before he was even 1 year old, left to fend for themselves. In my past life, Chu Yu didn't leave the cold palace until he was of age, only to accidentally injure me during an autumn hunt. The emperor, in a rage, demoted him to commoner status, and sent him to Yenzhou, where he eventually died during a peasant rebellion. But no one knew that the arrow that struck the deer was because I had accidentally stepped into its path, and the rebellion was orchestrated by my husband, Prince Jin. When news of Chu Yu's death reached the palace, Chu Mu was playing chess with the emperor. The emperor's expression remained unchanged. Just bury him. I threw all the fish food into the lake, causing a scramble among the fish. In the struggle for imperial power, no one is safe. I clapped my hands to shake off the crumbs, turned to return to the palace, and looked up to see Chu Mu standing not far off. I curtsied. "Greetings, Prince Jin. If you really want to marry that useless seventh prince." Chu Mu's expression was filled with sorrow. Seeing me frustrated and angry, he stepped forward and grabbed my arm, squeezing it painfully. I tried to struggle, but eventually gave up. The autumn wind swept through, causing our robes to flutter. I gazed at him. His peach blossom eyes, which looked at anyone with a touch of sincerity, hid deep indifference beneath them. I admired the seventh prince, so naturally, I must marry him. He didn't believe me, his face showing disbelief. "You have no connection with him. How can there be admiration? How does Prince Jin know I have no connection with him?" His mouth went a little dry from my question. "Qingwu, I am fond of you. If you wish, I will ask father to revoke the decree." His eyes were sincere, and I almost laughed. Was he in love with me, or with the Southern Ridge Army behind me? I raised my voice as a group of people approached from not far away. "Prince Jin, please let go. The imperial marriage decree has been given. Are you trying to ruin my reputation?" "Qingwu, don't marry that fool. I am your best choice. I can give you a life full of glory, wealth, and peace." He tried to pull me into his embrace. I tried to avoid him, but in the struggle, I slipped and fell into the lake. "Princess." "Qingwu." The sound of my fall alerted the emperor. I was rescued by the palace attendants and sent back to Chonghua Palace. Of course, the emperor heard Chu Mu's words. As he left, his gaze toward Chu Mu contained a trace of anger. Early autumn was slightly cool, and the lake water was not freezing, but the chill still made me ill for several days. At the mid-autumn banquet, Prince Jin misbehaved and was put under house arrest for a month. Although it wasn't a painful punishment, it exposed his ambitions for the throne. The emperor favored the crown prince, who was born of the late empress. Prince Jin had been hiding his true intentions for over 20 years, but now, the mask of brotherly love and filial piety couldn't stay on much longer. I also heard that the seventh prince had been brought out of the cold palace, given the title of Prince of Yen, and was granted a residence. His wedding was scheduled for the 9th of October. Tao Ji was dissatisfied. "The wedding is happening too soon?" I smiled and reassured her. Delaying might cause unforeseen changes. Chu Mu wasn't someone who gave up easily. Changes came swiftly. Chu Yu was assassinated. The sword had pierced him by 3 inches. If it weren't for the patrol guards arriving in time, he might have died on the spot. I requested an imperial decree to leave the palace and see him. He was severely injured, lying pale in bed. The imperial physician applied the medicine and then left. The room was soon left with just the two of us. I glanced at the blood-soaked bandages. "You're really harsh on yourself." He smiled, his face paling even more. "With the princess's help, I naturally must be thorough." Chu Yu was handsome, inheriting his mother's appearance, cold and aloof. The tear mole at the end of his brow added a touch of sickly allure. Now that he had been made a prince, his hair was tied up and adorned with a jeweled crown, making him seem even more distinguished. It was different from when I saw him in the cold palace, where even a lowly eunuch could assert dominance over him. Before the mid-autumn banquet, I used the token of the Liu family to draw him into the game. Although he was in a fallow state, his ambition couldn't be hidden in his eyes. I gave him the token and also handed him a poison. There was no cure for it. He could only take the medicine I provided monthly to suppress its effects. The Liu family's teachings were loyal to the emperor and country, forbidding rebellion, but having half of the Liu family's blood inside him didn't count as rebellion if he took that position. I served him the medicine, and his pale face was now tinged with a light flush. "Thank you, princess, but I can manage." He reached out to take it, but the movement caused him to cough violently. I held the medicine bowl in one hand and helped him calm his breathing with the other. "Doesn't your large mansion have a servant to help?" "I don't use servants. I'm used to it," I blurted out. "I'm not used to it." He understood and smiled, his voice warm. "Before you enter the mansion, I'll make sure everything is arranged." Naturally, I didn't mean it that way. I didn't want to continue the conversation, so I handed the bowl of medicine to him. Chu Yu wasn't favored, and the emperor wouldn't care how severe his injuries were. I had gone to the emperor's side and cried several times, but the Ministry of Justice had no leads. The more they couldn't find out, the more the emperor and the crown prince feared Prince Jin's ambitions. On the day Chu Mu's house arrest was lifted, he went straight to the emperor's study and knelt, hoping to get the marriage decree revoked. He was clever. The more he acted like a man deeply in love, the more his desire to marry me seemed pure. Tao Ji told me that he had been kneeling for 3 days. In the end, the emperor, who couldn't bear to see his son suffer, had him carried back to his residence and reassured him that he would find him a good marriage. When Tao Ji told me this, I was tending to a pot of late chrysanthemums. "Look at how beautiful these flowers are, but it's already October. If it were earlier, I could have asked the empress to hold a flower viewing banquet." "The princess shouldn't think about the flower viewing banquet. Think about your wedding banquet instead. Your wedding veil isn't even embroidered yet." "How would I know how to do that?" "It'll be fine as long as the embroidery bureau does it." In Daki, it's customary for the bride to embroider her own wedding clothes and veil, as it's believed to bring blessings for a loving marriage. In my past life, I had pricked my fingers while embroidering, only to end up dying. Tao Ji, frustrated, could only take the needle and thread to embroider for me. As I watched her nimble fingers at work, an idea formed in my mind. I knelt before the empress, holding up the hideously embroidered veil. "Your Majesty, the wedding date is approaching, but I cannot embroider this veil properly." I humbly asked the empress to find me a master to help. The empress, who had a headache upon seeing the veil, sighed in exasperation. "What is this that you've embroidered?" I wiped away a tear with my handkerchief. "I lost my mother at a young age, and my elders have all been soldiers. They've never taught me." The empress shook her head helplessly as she looked at the veil. "I'm afraid even if the embroidery bureau comes, they won't be able to teach you. I'll ask Lady Lin from the Lin family to help you." Lady Lin was a talented woman in the capital, skilled in music, chess, calligraphy, painting, and especially embroidery. She was the empress's niece and had grown up with Prince Jin. If it weren't for Prince Jin's ambitions regarding the Southern Ridge Army behind me, their marriage would have been inevitable. Since they were in love, I naturally would lend a helping hand. It wouldn't hurt to support a pair of lovers. Lin Wanshu entered the Chonghua Palace. When I went to see her, a fleeting, unnatural expression crossed her beautiful face, but she quickly regained her composure. "Greetings, Your Highness." The person before me was indeed one of the capital's most beautiful women, her skin radiant like a lotus flower, her brows delicate and curved. She wore a light-colored satin dress embroidered with Suzhou silk, the long skirt trailing on the ground, with a pearl belt around her waist, accentuating her slender figure. She curtsied, and the tassel on her hairpins swayed gracefully, looking stunning. "I heard Miss Lin is coming, and the princesses all wish to consult with you. I've arranged to meet them in the Imperial Garden. Please have some tea, and we will go right over." Lin Wanshu seemed a bit hesitant in response to my enthusiasm. I handed her the tea, but to my surprise, her hand trembled, spilling the tea everywhere. "Your Highness, I didn't hold the cup properly. Please punish me." I smiled as I looked at the spilled tea on the edge of her dress. "It's no trouble, but it's a pity your clothes got dirty. Taoji, please bring my spare clothes for Miss Lin to change into." "Thank you for your kindness, Your Highness." Wanshu brought her own clothes to the palace and will change in Kuan Ning Palace later. I hesitated slightly. But if we wait for you to go back and forth, the princesses will likely have to wait for too long. Taoji, could you send a quick-footed little eunuch to fetch them? It's not proper for Miss Lin to leave the palace in wet clothes, I added. After some hesitation, Lin Wanshu nodded in agreement. Once Lin Wanshu had changed, the princesses waiting in the imperial garden had already sent someone to hurry us twice. The lead eunuch guided us through a narrower path, and we happened to run into the emperor, who was walking with Empress Xian. We stepped forward to greet them, and for a brief moment, the emperor's gaze lingered on Lin Wanshu, his expression showing a flash of admiration. You must be the daughter of the Minister of Rights, indeed a beautiful woman, Empress Xian remarked in an unamused tone. She had been in favor for many years, her position unshakable, and she was the type who could not tolerate the emperor admiring another woman. The emperor cleared his throat lightly and said, "Since the princesses are waiting, let's hurry on." Empress Xian shot a venomous glance at Lin Wanshu, who trembled slightly. As she rose, she accidentally stepped on her skirt and fell to the ground. I gasped in surprise and quickly rushed to help her, but her taller stature caused her to pull me down with her. "Such disgraceful behavior," the emperor said, displeased as he watched us fall. Empress Xian, standing beside him, let out a malicious laugh. We scrambled to get up and apologize, but in the process, a jade pendant fell from Lin Wanshu's possession. She hurriedly tried to pick it up, but the emperor noticed the item immediately. "What's this? Show it to me." Lin Wanshu froze, too scared to defy his command, and handed it to him. I had seen that jade pendant before. It had been taken out after my death, when she and Chu Mu were deeply in love. It was a token of Chu Mu's sincerity, given to her before he sought imperial approval to marry me. The emperor recognized it immediately. Every prince's birth was marked by an imperial gift, a jade pendant engraved with their name. The pendant was precious and symbolized the prince's identity. Now, the pendant of King Jin was in Lin Wanshu's hands, and its meaning was clear. Empress Xian, always quick with her words, spoke up first. "So, King Jin has only just sought the princess's hand in marriage and now gives a token of affection to Miss Lin. King Jin has always been steady and reserved, but it seems he is a romantic at heart." Lin Wanshu glanced at me, biting her lip as she explained, "I have no special relationship with King Jin, nor have I ever seen this jade pendant. It was just that when I spilled tea on my skirt in your highness's palace, I changed clothes." She trailed off, putting on a pitiful expression as if she had been wronged. I knelt down in response. "Your Majesty, it seems that Miss Lin is implying that the jade pendant was placed on her by me." Lin Wanshu was somewhat clever, but not enough to avoid making a mistake. If she had agreed with me, perhaps the emperor would have granted a marriage to King Jin, but since she was trying to frame me, she hoped to use this to push me toward King Jin and help her ascend to the position of empress. The emperor wasn't foolish. He held the pendant in his hand and asked, "Miss Lin, you truly have no special relationship with King Jin?" "No, Your Majesty." "Very well. If that is the case, then would you be willing to enter the palace?" At the emperor's words, both Empress Xian and Lin Wanshu turned pale. When the emperor, the supreme ruler, spoke, there was no room for refusal. The day Lin Wanshu was made a consort, Chu Mu stormed into my palace. "You schemed behind Wanshu's back," he said, his sword pressed against my neck, veins bulging with anger. I waved off the terrified palace servants, reaching out to gently move his sword away. "King Jin, if I die, you will never have a chance at that position." At this point, he was visibly dejected. With the support of the Southern Ridge Army gone, the woman he loved had become his own mother consort. He scoffed. "So you knew from the start. You married Chuyu to support him in fighting me, didn't you?" I didn't answer. Instead, I handed him a piece of paper. "My embroidery skills aren't great. The request to have Miss Lin enter the palace was the Empress's wish. The path we took to meet the Emperor and the personal matters of the jade pendant I had no part in. Though it wasn't my wish, this matter happened because of me. This is my apology." The paper contained detailed accusations about the crown prince, including mining operations, gunpowder workshops, and the fostering of private soldiers. Chu Mu was incredulous. How do you know all this? These were things I had investigated in my previous life, and now they would save him a lot of trouble. This matter doesn't concern King Jin, I replied. If you don't believe the contents of this paper, a simple investigation will prove it. Prince Qi has no interest in courtly struggles. Qinggu wants to use these matters to offer him a position outside of the capital. If one day King Jin gets what he wants, please allow Prince Qi to live as a free lord. I spoke with sincerity, mirroring how he had once expressed his feelings to me. He took the letter, sheathed his sword, and left with a final harsh warning. Wanshu's matter better have nothing to do with you. I couldn't help but chuckle at his retreating figure. What did it matter? If he really killed me and took Lin Wanshu back, I might praise him for his deep affection. But in the end, it was nothing but a fleeting matter. As the wedding day approached, the Empress seethed with anger, but still wore a fake smile as she arranged my marriage. I sat in front of the copper mirror, dressing in my bridal attire. Taoji was in a dilemma, holding two bridal veils. One was a gorgeous and finely crafted one from the embroidery workshop, while the other, sent by Chu Yu, looked somewhat shabby. Miss, which one would you prefer to wear? Prince Yan's intention is clear, so it's better not to refuse. I'll wear this one. I was carried into the Yanwangfu, the residence draped in red silk, but it wasn't lively. Chu Yu had no close friends, and most of the uncles who were friendly with the Liu family were stationed at the border. Without proper summons, no one could enter the capital. Only gifts were sent on their behalf. After the wedding ceremony, I was gently escorted to the bridal chamber by the nanny, with dates, peanuts, and lotus seeds spread across the bed. There were no guests in the residence, and before half a stick of incense had burned, Chu Yu entered through the door. Lifting my veil, I saw his handsome face, and even before we drank the marriage wine, there was a hint of drunkenness in his eyes. Princess. From now on, call me Qinggu. Qinggu. Chu Yu's voice was soft, and his hand that brushed against me trembled slightly. I looked up at him, my slightly raised eyes sparkling with a hint of seduction. I leaned in to kiss him, my lips moist and sweet. I had no objections to consummating the marriage with him, especially since I needed to bear his eldest son. After an intense and passionate night, I was exhausted. He held me in his arms, his low voice laced with temptation. Lu Qinggu, I'm yours now. Over a month into my marriage with Chu Yu, the Prince of Jin and the Crown Prince officially began their conflict in the court. One by one, the Crown Prince's misdeeds were revealed. Even though the Emperor favored him, he couldn't allow his grip on power to slip. The Crown Prince was imprisoned, and the court's power structure was reshuffled. A large-scale battle was imminent. Chu Yu requested the post of General of Yenzhou, and on the day he left for his appointment, Chu Mu rode a tall horse to see him off. He was glowing with vitality, looking every bit the energetic man he once was, no longer showing the defeated demeanor he had when he barged into my chambers. I looked at the soldiers surrounding the Prince of Jin's residence. It doesn't seem like the Prince of Jin is sending him off. I served under General Liu for 2 years, and I've heard that the Liu family's command tokens can summon the troops of the Southern Ridge Army. Since the seventh brother is going to Yenzhou, he probably won't need it anymore. I understood instantly and gestured for Chu Yu to hand the token to him. The Liu family has no intentions of rebellion. The Prince of Jin should not tarnish the reputation of the Southern Ridge Army. Of course, may the seventh brother and seventh sister-in-law's journey be smooth. Thank you for your well wishes, Your Highness. The guards parted, and the carriage continued on its way. Chu Yu and I sat in the carriage, momentarily silent. Whether due to his trust in me, or because I held the antidote for him, he obeyed all my decisions unconditionally, without even asking why. I decided to break the silence. Why don't you ask? You have your reasons, he replied, closing his eyes to rest. I, on the other hand, felt a little mischievous. Aren't you afraid I'll switch sides and join the Prince of Jin's camp? Chu Yu's hand, resting on his knee, clenched and then relaxed. He spoke softly. I was once a prince trapped in the cold palace. It was only with your help that I left the palace. If one day I can be a pawn for you to rise to the top, I'll die knowing I've served my purpose. I clicked my tongue. There was no fun in his words anymore. The emperor wouldn't easily depose the crown prince. Shu could wait, but I wondered if Lin Wanshu in the palace would be willing to wait. The empress had the imperial decree to command the palace guards, and with Chumu's army of 100,000 city defenders, the deposed crown prince wouldn't be a problem. Now I was sending him the Southern Ridge Army, all for his peace of mind. If he didn't act in rebellion, how would I have the excuse to enter the capital and rescue the emperor? After traveling south for 3 days, it was clear that despite possessing the Liu family's command token, Chumu still lacked peace of mind. Although I had prepared for it, the assassins came in waves, and no matter how skilled the guards were, they couldn't withstand such continuous attacks. Thinking back to how Chumu and I were attacked in my past life, I grabbed Chuyu's sleeve. Chuyu, you must protect me. I'm pregnant. He froze for a moment, his eyes full of surprise. He almost forgot to dodge the sword coming at him. I managed to push him aside, but the next moment, he threw himself on top of me to shield me. A flying arrow pierced his shoulder. I heard him stifle a groan of pain as he pushed me into the carriage, pulling out the arrow and charging through the siege. The sounds of battle grew distant as Chuyu found a cave to hide us. Stay here. I'll lead them away, he said. The scene from my previous life was repeating itself, but this time, I was the one being protected. What about you? I asked, my worry evident. He pried my hand off his, gently reassuring me. If I die, Chumu will surely rebel. You're clever enough to find a way to return to the capital and rescue the emperor. The child in your womb will be the future emperor. I've said it before, if you want to rise, I'm willing to be your pawn. I blinked back tears. Chuyu left resolutely. The truth was, I had lied to him. I wasn't pregnant. I don't know how long we hid in the cave, but eventually, the Liu family's guards found us. Chuyu was nowhere to be seen. I wiped my tears and ordered, continue on to Yenzhou. Yenzhou was the closest to the southern border, and Liu Guanghuai, the general station there, had been fostered by the Liu family. He was almost like family. Yenzhou was difficult to reach, with fog, snow, and wind blinding the way, as if the world had no end. Even though I was wrapped in the finest fox fur, the biting cold still made me shiver uncontrollably. After traveling for 4 days, the carriage wheels sank into the snow. I was escorted into a nearby ruined temple to rest. The temple was crowded with refugees dressed in thin clothes. Unfortunately, there was little we could do for them, as most of our supplies had been lost in the attack. Human nature is selfish, and I couldn't afford to worry about their lives. I sat in a corner, waiting for them to free the carriage, when a dirty little hand tugged at my sleeve. Madam, do you have any medicine for wounds? The girl spoke, looking thin and fragile, making me pity her. The guards were about to scold her, but I stopped them. Are you injured? I asked, examining her. She didn't seem hurt. It's not me. It's a big brother. Grandpa says he needs medicine. I followed her finger to where a person lay behind a Buddha statue, but couldn't see his face clearly. I motioned for the guards to check on him. The guards leaned in and whispered, Miss, it's the master. Sure enough, it was Chuyu, covered in wounds, his breath faint. Beside him, an elderly man with a white beard was tending to him. We found him at the cliff. He's barely alive. He is my husband. I will repay you for saving him, I said. The old man waved his hand. As long as he survives, no need for thanks. The guards carefully lifted Chuyu into the carriage. I kept some essential supplies and gave the rest to the refugees. We continued traveling with Chuyu. Through the snowstorm, the guards' voices rang out, both surprised and joyful. Miss, we've arrived. I poked my head out of the carriage to see the towering city walls rise up and the red military flags flapping in the snowstorm. After resting in Yenzhou for several days, Chuyu had recovered well. The pretense of my pregnancy had collapsed, and his face showed a melancholy expression, though he said nothing. News came from the capital. The crown prince was dead, the emperor was seriously ill, and the Jin king had taken the regency. Now that the time had come, the situation would be decided. The Jin king had killed the crown prince, but without the imperial decree to ascend the throne, his position was unstable. He couldn't immediately kill the emperor, as the death of both the crown prince and emperor would raise suspicions among the people. The Southern Ridge Army, gathered by Lu Guanghuai, had already camped outside the city of Yenzhou, waiting for orders. Chu Yu, leading the army, wore armor, exuding a killing aura. He was no longer the prince begging for food in the cold palace. When the Southern Ridge Army's rallying cry to rescue the emperor and aid the king was heard, it completely exposed the Jin king's ambitions to the world. The guards of the city, living in comfort, were no match for the battle-hardened Southern Ridge Army. The city gates were flung open and corpses lay scattered, marking the beginning of the imperial struggle for power. Chu Yu sent me back to Yan Wang's mansion first, just as fireworks lit up the sky, tearing apart the darkness. A small sedan chair was carried into the palace, where the gates had already been broken. Dead bodies were scattered everywhere, and the once glorious imperial palace was now covered in a layer of blood red. Entering the Yangxin Hall, Chu Yu stood over the Jin king, sword pointed at the emperor. Upon seeing me enter, he quickly moved his foot and sheathed his sword, standing behind me. With his hair down, Chu Mu laughed loudly from the ground. Rescue the emperor? Aid the king? What a joke. How could I have believed your lies back then? Though I was the daughter of a military general, I had never wielded a sword. Taking the blood-stained sword from Chu Yu's hand, I struggled to hold it. The Jin king never imagined it would come to this. Victory to the king, defeat to the bandit. If you don't kill me today, you'll die by my hand someday. I smiled faintly and pressed the sword's edge against his wrist. The Jin king once had deep feelings for me. How could I bear to kill you? I brought Lin Wanshu into the palace to help you and your beloved be together. The emperor didn't want to grant the marriage, but after Yan Wang ascends the throne, I'll have her granted to you. How about that? With a push, blood splashed from Chu Mu's wrist, causing him to cry out in pain. He struggled, but Chu Yu stepped on him, preventing his escape. Lu Qinggu, I have no enmity with you. I shifted the sword and struck his other wrist. No enmity? If the mid-autumn banquet had gone as you wished, would you have spared my life when the Jin king succeeded? The intense pain caused him to curl up, and I squatted down, looking at his blood-stained face, feeling a sense of satisfaction. I wondered if he had felt the same when he tried to kill me. Guards, sever his tendons and imprison him in the Jin king's mansion. Remove all the servants and let Lin Wanshu take care of him. Tell her, if the Jin king dies, she won't live either. I wasn't a virtuous person, nor was I interested in trading lives. If redemption was needed, he would have to live to pay for it. Chu Mu was taken away by the guards, and I turned to look at the emperor, hiding in the corner. Now barefoot, he had no trace of his former regal aura. You didn't come to rescue the emperor, you came to rebel, he shivered, his eyes filled with fear. Without the imperial decree of succession, even if you sit on the throne, the people of the world will rise against you. But now he had no other sons. If the Chu family claimed the throne, what was wrong with that? The Jin king didn't kill him, still considering a bit of fatherly love. But Chu didn't have that hesitation. I covered my eyes, and the sound of a blade cutting through flesh echoed in Yangxin Hall. The situation was now settled. The coronation ceremony was held on the same day as the imperial title conferral. Chu Yu had been busy lately and had stayed in the imperial study for several days in a row. In the small kitchen, I made some snacks and packed them in a food box to bring to him. As I neared the imperial study, I heard loud voices inside. I stopped the eunuch who was about to announce me and stood at the door to listen carefully. It was just some advice on selecting concubines, expanding the harem, and ensuring a continuation of the bloodline. These old politicians, even before the new emperor had ascended, were already thinking about using their daughters to gain power. I pushed the door open, and the old ministers, seeing me, stiffened their necks and scolded. The imperial study is where the state affairs are discussed. How can a woman like you come and go freely? Minister Shen, your words are so annoying. Your daughter must be the same. You shouldn't be participating in the selection of concubines. The selection of concubines is a national matter. How can you make the decision? Minister Shen, red-faced with anger, was about to say more, but was interrupted by Chu Yu, who stood in the middle of the room. She is the Empress. Why should her word not count? Everyone leave. Chu Yu's voice was filled with anger, and the others, though unwilling, had no choice but to leave. He took the food box from my hand and pulled me down to sit. Why are you here? If I didn't come, I'd fear that the position of Empress would change, and I wouldn't even know about it. His flustered reaction made him appear somewhat nervous. Qinggu, my Empress will only be you. I pulled my hand from his grasp and said, Donan. It's not that I'm without room to tolerate others. I just want the position of Empress to be mine, and the position of Crown Prince to be our child's. Don't forget, the poison inside you still has no cure. The gleam in Chu Yu's eyes dimmed, and after a long pause, he finally said helplessly, Qinggu, you really don't understand my feelings. I looked at the emperor before me. I understood his feelings, but how much is a man's true love worth? Power was the eternal foundation. The deep affection in his eyes seemed familiar. I reached out and traced his features, finally pressing a kiss to his lips. If you truly love me, then sit firmly on this throne, protect me, and protect our child. He smiled helplessly. All right. In the spring of the 4th year of Qiyuan, the 7th prince of Daqi ascended the throne and conferred his wife, Lu Qingmu, as empress, abolishing the old system of selecting concubines and leaving the imperial harem empty. By the end of summer that same year, the empress was pregnant, and the emperor was overjoyed. A general amnesty was declared, and taxes and corvée labor were exempted for 3 years. Side story, Chu Yu. I am the 7th prince of Daqi. Though called a prince, I lived worse than a dog in the cold palace. From the time I could remember, I had been confined to a small corner of the world. The old nurse in the cold palace said my mother had committed a great wrong and was cast aside here. My mother was beautiful but always in a frenzy, her hair piled over her face like a ghost. Once a month, she would have a few lucid days. During those times, she would tidy her hair and go out with a wooden hairpin in her hair. I didn't know what she did outside, but when she returned, she would always bring me some cakes and meats that I couldn't normally eat. One day, I secretly followed her out and saw her lying naked on a dilapidated wooden bed, surrounded by eunuchs with no roots. I rushed in, wanting to take her away, but was stomped to the ground. My mother wept and told me to close my eyes while the eunuchs watched the entire scene, enjoying themselves. When we returned from that room, my mother became even more insane. She would often hit me, scratching me with her nails, pulling my hair, throwing everything she could find at me, using all sorts of violent methods to vent the frustration in her heart. When the pain became unbearable, I would even wonder if my mother were gone, would I no longer be beaten? When I was 10, my mother really did die. For once, she was lucid and told me that I was a prince, but I lived like a dog. She said she no longer wanted to live like a dog. My mother jumped into a well. Her death was like a drop of water falling into the sea, causing no waves. It turned out that even after my mother died, I still had to be beaten. Sometimes by palace maids or eunuchs who had suffered mistreatment from the master, other times by well-dressed princes and princesses. When I turned 15, I had grown taller and more resembling my mother. Her face was even more eye-catching, and the looks cast upon me shifted from disdain to possessiveness. There were always bold people who put drugs in my food and came into my room at night. I couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't just a palace maid, it was a eunuch. His short, fatty fingers reached under my clothes, and the intense disgust suppressed the heat in my body. I grabbed the wooden hairpin hidden under my pillow and stabbed it into his throat. The final legacy of my mother broke. Warm liquid splattered onto my face. So this was what killing someone felt like. I cleaned the blood and, under the cover of night, threw the body into the Imperial Gardens well. On my way back to the cold palace, I encountered a little girl crying in a corner. She wasn't a palace maid but dressed in exquisite palace clothes, like a porcelain doll. When the porcelain doll saw me, she asked, "Who are you?" I clenched the broken wooden hairpin in my sleeve and asked in return, "Who are you?" "I am Lu Qingmu." Lu Qingmu. I had heard of her in the palace. The men of the Lu family had died for the country, and their orphan daughter was taken into the palace to be raised as a princess. "Why is a little girl like you hiding here?" She lowered her head, hiding her tiny body in the corner. Tears fell from her eyes. "I miss my father and brother." Seeing her cry, I panicked, wanting to comfort her but not knowing what to say, so I clumsily told her to stop crying. "Can you hug me? You look a little like my brother." Her soft voice, laced with sobs, was as sweet as a bite of dessert. She stretched out her little hands toward me, her lashes still hanging with golden teardrops. My body, already drugged, surged with heat, but I didn't reach out to hug her. My clothes were still stained with blood, filthy and foul-smelling. I was like a rat living in a gutter, too scared to soil the bright moon above. My mother was right. I was a useless person. After seeing her for just one moment, I would toss and turn every night, haunted by the image of her crying in the corner. If only I had hugged her then. How good would that have been? But my terrible days still continued. When I saw her again, I was being whipped by the crown prince. The pain from the torn skin and flesh was unbearable. I thought I was done for, and that if I died here, I would be spared from the endless suffering. "Don't hit him." It was her voice. My nose turned sour, and tears almost fell. After enduring all these years of beatings, it was the first time I heard someone say, "Don't hit him." Through my blurred vision, I saw a pale yellow figure. I was lifted up and laid in a soft bed. When I opened my eyes again, I was in clean clothes and my wounds had been treated. She had red-rimmed eyes and placed a chestnut cake into my hand. "If anyone bullies you again, you can come to Chonghua Palace to find me." But she didn't know that a prince from the cold palace couldn't enter Chonghua Palace, and I didn't know I was allergic to chestnuts. I lay in bed for 5 days. Since I was sent back by people from Chonghua Palace, the usual arrogant people were more restrained, but mocking words never ceased. A lowly child born of a dancing girl, yet now climbing into the princess's bed. "Filthy thing, don't you fear tarnishing the princess's eyes? She's kind-hearted, but she's going to marry the crown prince. What has it got to do with her? When I turned 20, she married, but not to the crown prince, but to the Gene King. I was happy for her, as the Gene King was an exceptional man and truly loved her. It was said that he kneeled for 3 days in the imperial study before he could ask for her hand. Looking at all the red lanterns in the palace, I couldn't help but feel sad for myself. If I had been a legitimate prince, could I have also kneeled in the imperial study for a few days and married her? After I came of age, the emperor seemed to remember there was a prince in the cold palace. I was brought out and half-heartedly granted a title and a residence. That year, during the autumn hunt, I saw her again. She had tied her hair like a woman and had become more gentle and graceful. I didn't like this version of her. She should have been the vibrant and lively Lu Qingmu, not the dignified and polite Jin Wangfei. Anger and jealousy filled my heart, and I drew my bow to shoot a deer running in the distance. A figure flashed before me. "Princess," I called out, but it was too late. She had grown up in such adoration. How could she withstand the pain of an arrow through her shoulder? I rushed forward and picked her up. She felt light, as if an illusion, but this was what it felt like to hold someone. Her weight stayed for a moment before being hurriedly taken from me by the Gene King. I knelt before my father, the emperor. Wounding the princess was a serious matter, and with the consequences of the pain I had caused, it was as if they were carving my flesh and bones. Being demoted to a commoner and exiled to Yenzhou was, for me, a good thing. But it seemed they didn't plan to let me off, with rioting commoners and skilled techniques. I lay on the muddy road, feeling the blood flowing out of my body, not knowing if her shoulder was healing. And